Thank you very much, Mihai. Good morning, everyone. A very warm, literally, welcome from my side as well. My name is Andrei Govatario. I'm a research fellow at the Center on Regulation in Europe, think tank in Brussels. And it's my pleasure to be the MC of the day, to introduce the panels. With this excellent opening remarks, I think it's a very good start for the topics that we will be discussing today, because we will be talking about energy transition investments, critical infrastructure, industrial decarbonization, power generation, and of course, energy resilience, security of supply in Romania and the region. So without further ado, it is my honor to introduce our first panel session, Propelling the Energy Transition, Leveraging Resources and Expanding Investment. With that, I will hand it over to our moderator, Mr. Landon Derrance, Senior Director, and Richard Morningstar, Chair of Global Energy Security at the Atlantic Council Global Energy Center. Over to you, Mr. Derrance.
Well, good morning, and thank you for being here. I am Landon Derrance. I am the Senior Director of the Atlantic Council Global Energy Center and Morningstar Chair for Global Energy Security. For those that know Dick Morningstar, he sends his regards. He's deeply passionate about this region and the work on energy security. And the Atlantic Council keeps up that momentum by being a part of forums like this. So for those joining us here in person, for those joining us virtually around the world, very excited to welcome you to the 5th Partnership for Transatlantic Energy and Climate Cooperation. It's a very exciting moment for us, and thank you to the Ministry of Energy of Romania, to the Department of Energy and the US and other partners for making sure the Atlantic Council is a part of this story. It's worth noting we've come a long way, and Secretary Granholm spoke briefly of a lot of the conversations in the future ahead. But this being the 5th Partnership for Transatlantic Energy Cooperation is a moment because it shows that some platforms and policy are truly enduring. We've made tremendous progress in the global energy transition from when PTEC began in Houston in 2019. If you look at renewable energy capacity alone, it grew by 50% in 2023. Up to 510 gigawatts globally. For context, in 2019, when the first PTEC ministerial was pulled together, it was around 200 gigawatts. We've seen a lot of momentum on the energy transition, most recently at COP28, where we saw global commitments to triple renewable energy, double energy efficiency, and with more than 20 countries launching a declaration to also triple nuclear deployment. But none of this happens without finance and the resources to help pull it together. So we're very excited today to have a discussion to kick off the PTEC ministerial with a conversation about propelling the energy transition by leveraging resources and expanding investment. And for that conversation, we have a esteemed group of panelists. I'm very excited to welcome His Excellency Viktor Parlikov, the Moldovan Minister of Energy, Victoria Zinchuk, who is the Director for Romania of the European Bank for Reconstruction and Development, Marius Cara, who's the head in the Romanian office of the European Investment Bank, Agnes Dasewicz, who is the Chief Operating Officer of the U.S. International Development Finance Corporation in Washington, D.C., and George Picard, Managing Director, Global Government Affairs and Policy at the newly commissioned GE Vernova. It's great to have you all here, and we're really excited to dig in to this topic about making sure we resource the energy transition well. Before we get to the minister, I really want to set the stage and allow you an opportunity to reflect on maybe some of the comments about finance and industry, and I want to go to Agnes. Over the past few years, the DFC has taken on a leading role in financing global energy transition. I'm interested to hear, as we set the stage for this conversation, your outlook on how we should approach energy transition from short versus long-term strategies when addressing climate action and the energy transition needs, the energy security needs of the future.
Thank you, and thank you very much for inviting us to be at this important event. For those of you who are not familiar with the U.S. Development Finance Corporation, we are the U.S. government's development finance arm. And along with our sister agencies, such as the Export-Import Bank and USTDA, we work to finance private sector projects all over the world. We're open across 112 countries. And last year, we invested $9 billion. So of that $9 billion, last year we invested $3.5 billion just into energy projects. Obviously, energy is a huge priority sector for us. Out of the $3.5 billion, we invested $1.5 billion just here in Europe. And the reason we did that is because we believe energy security and transition to a clean energy economy are incredibly important and remain a focus of our investment activities. I feel that it's important to say that we are incredibly excited about the potential of this region. We've already made lots of investments. Some of these investments include, for example, in Poland, $500 million to help PKN Orlen manage its gas purchases. Or another example, we invested in Bulgar Transgas to help them refurbish and build new gas storage facilities, which will enable not only Bulgaria but the entire region to manage gas supply in a much more efficient way. These investments are important because we really are helping countries here build energy security and really reduce dependence on any actors, any malign actors, when it comes to energy manipulation. So we're incredibly excited that this region is not only investing in new infrastructure, but it's in particular investing in its own security and its own sustainability. Energy is really key to everything that we do and to economic growth. And this region is growing so quickly that in addition to energy security, we also have to be very much focused on the clean energy transition. So with the growing demand for energy and with new technologies available, we feel like this is a very exciting moment to not only support energy security, but also to really back new technologies and clean energy as the region tries to really move away from its dependence on coal and fossil fuels to clean energy, and we have already made some of these investments. We either make those investments directly or indirectly, I should note. And for example, what we've done is we invested in the 3Cs Fund. I'm happy today to announce that we've made our first disbursement to the 3Cs Fund, and our contribution to that fund will be actually used to support 2 Romanian clean energy companies. So not only are we supporting gas infrastructure, we're also looking at how do we support clean energy, especially solar, wind, and, as was mentioned here, nuclear. So we've signed 2 LOIs, one in Poland and one here in Romania, to support the development and deployment of SMR technology in the region. We feel that these types of technologies can very much complement the investments in gas and energy infrastructure overall to really, in the short term, make sure that the region reaches its energy security goals, but in the long term, it transitions to a clean energy future.
Thanks, Agnes. I think it's a part of the conversation that we'll have today is balancing that space between energy security and climate goals. I do want to complement your thoughts with a European perspective on this. And Marius, the European Investment Bank, obviously a corollary on this side of the Atlantic in terms of thinking about how to finance projects that advance climate action. How is EIB working to fulfill the goals of the EU Green Deal? Obviously, a lot of transformation in the Commission on the horizon. I think deployment of clean energy will remain incredibly important, as will decarbonization technologies. How are you financing these technologies to get them deployed?
Yes, the European Union is firmly at the forefront of the global fight against climate change. And with the European Green Deal, the EU aims at making the European economy sustainable and inclusive. And the European Investment Bank, which is the bank of the EU member states, is an important partner of the EU in this endeavor, in this new growth strategy. And therefore we play a leading role in the implementation of the Paris Agreement and of the Sustainable Development Goals. To do this, we equipped ourselves. We have transformed the way that the bank operates. And I'll just mention the key, let's say, elements of this transformation. We stopped investing in fossil fuel since the end of 2021. All our projects are now Paris Agreement aligned, which means that we apply due diligence and screening criteria to ensure that the emission constraints of the Paris Agreement are met. We aim to invest 1 trillion in climate and environmental sustainable investments by the end of 2030, the critical decade. And to do so, we decided that more than 50% of our total investments each year should be in climate and energy transition. And actually in 2023, we have surpassed this benchmark with more than 60% meeting this criteria, which meant at the level of the EIB group more than 49 billion investments in clean energy and climate action. But most importantly, we act as a catalyst for investments by crowding in private investors in our projects. We typically do not finance more than 50% of any project, so clearly we need co-financiers. And our robust due diligence and appraisal process usually encourages other partners to come and invest together with us. But at the same time, we see these days that the liquidity is extremely high in the financial markets, and there's a lot of capital chasing investable projects. So we recognize the need to build an important pipeline of projects which are bankable in this field. And to do so, we use our technical and advisory capacity to advise clients in the preparation and in the design of bankable projects. These advisory services should strengthen the economic and technical foundation of projects. And to give you some examples, we advised in, for example, in the fields of battery storage and pumped hydro storage in Bulgaria, energy efficient street lighting in Vilnius, capacity building for Slovenian electricity distributors. And we have, of course, several assignments in Romania, advising in the terms of financial strategy at Nuclear Electrica, project implementation at Transelectrica, or climate and decarbonization strategies with Transgaz. But like you rightly pointed, with the energy crisis and the war, the EIB has had to intensify the efforts in supporting accelerated investments in areas that require large volumes of long-term and low-cost capital, which is our traditional specialty. This is how the EIB started as a bank, by financing large infrastructure projects with the help of money attracted from capital markets at low cost. Yeah? This is our traditional operating model. And this will include renewable power generation, development of carbon technologies or power transmission lines. But in support of the Repower EU, which is the plan that the EU Commission came up with to address the challenges of the energy crisis and the war. We have committed to additional 45 billion of lending and loan guarantees and equity investments on top of our usual program. And this will again go in clean energy or manufacturing capacities for state-of-the-art strategies, net zero technologies and products until 2027. And continuing to consolidate the role of the EIB as the climate bank, energy remains the first priority of the EIB strategic roadmap endorsed by our Board of Governors in June. And we recently signed financing for upgrades in Poland and Ljubljana's regional transmission networks, for example. We have also financed in the past a couple of projects, the electricity transmission interconnection between Romania and Moldova. In Hungary, we fund the reinforcement and expansion of electricity transmission and distribution networks. We fund additional power requirements for battery manufacturing facilities. And we're also looking at innovative investments, such as higher risk and demonstration projects in the areas of strategic importance which do not find easy access to the traditional sources of funds, such as the Innofin Energy Demonstration Project Instrument. We also look into venture debt or quasi-equity, which is our own developed product to support early stage, highly innovative companies in developing green technology capacities. And lastly, in the area of advisory services, we are developing a product which is meant to provide guarantees to PPA off-takers. So we work with the Commission in this, and DG ENER wants to enhance the adoption of commercial PPAs, including the development of dedicated financial instruments for that. So the idea is that the EIB would provide guarantees to corporate clients, and we have designed and developed draft term sheets and plan to market test this instrument in a pilot project. To conclude, we offer a comprehensive toolbox of financing and advisory support for the clean energy transition, including technologies and skills. We will continue to finance large energy infrastructure projects via traditional loans, in parallel with financing via more innovative instruments, new technologies, and higher risk projects.
Marius, thanks for that comprehensive review of EIB's tool set. You know, Secretary Granholm spoke of the power of policy, and I'm thinking about, you know, your reflections on Repower EU and how EIB's coordinating with this. Of course, particularly seized with the idea that you need co-financiers, which implies space for public-private partnership. And I do want to turn this to industry for a second. And George, as the sole industry rep on the team here, on the panel, you know, when we talk about the need to mitigate climate change and accelerate the energy transition, how does that translate? How are you seeing the policy, the financial tools entering the private sector to help companies like GE Vernova deploy these transition technologies?
Landon, thank you, and thanks to the Atlantic Council and our hosts, the Romanian government and others. It's a pleasure to be here. Just a quick word about GE Vernova. As you mentioned up front, Landon, we're a startup company. We've been around since April 2nd of this year as an independent company. Of course, we have a 130-year plus legacy, previously having been part of the General Electric company. So GE Vernova is the energy technology piece of what used to be the General Electric company. And we have segments in power, in wind, and in electrification and software. We really kind of see ourselves as the energy technology company to support the world in its drive to achieve net zero in the energy transition. We're seeing a couple of major drivers really in the energy sector. We've heard several references today already to the energy trilemma. You know, the need to provide electricity reliably, affordably, and sustainably. But over the last several years, we've seen an increasing emphasis on energy security. I'm not sure we need to create a new term, the energy quadrilemma, but in any event, we see equal amount of value and importance placed on the need not just to have reliable, affordable, and sustainable energy, but also secure access to fuel, secure infrastructure to convert and deliver electrons to the point of use. The second major trend we're seeing is really a drive to electrification. That doesn't just mean providing access to electricity to the more than 750 million people in the world that currently lack it, but also to electrify wider segments of the economy. That includes industry, transportation, buildings, et cetera. I'd say electrification has always been sort of the smaller, underlooked, underappreciated part of GE Vernova's portfolio. And really what we're seeing is that segment evolving into the future for the next 10 to 20 years. So these two twin dynamics are really fueling a lot of change as we see it. Changes in emphasis and focus on power generation. Obviously, we've heard it several times already today, the need to deploy wider volumes of zero and lower carbon power generation systems, wind, solar, pump storage, hydro, small modular reactors. We heard a reference to combined heat and power here in Romania. We're working in Moldova to look at deployment of more efficient combined heat and power district heating systems there. Continued emphasis on coal to gas switching, particularly here in Eastern Europe. And of course, the continued utilization of natural gas raises questions about climate change and the whole sustainability element of the energy trilemma. And so that's why we at GE Vernova are working very hard to try to decarbonize gas through the utilization of hydrogen as a fuel and also the deployment of carbon capture, utilization and storage systems, as well as direct air capture. In the transmission and distribution centers, we're seeing a wider focus on the need to deploy high voltage direct current systems. So to deliver those zero and low carbon electrons from the point of generation to the point of use, a wider need for interconnections. We've seen that here in Eastern Europe, particularly with Ukraine, the need to solidify Ukraine's interconnection to the European system. And then, of course, the deployment of distributed energy systems through microgrids, et cetera. I think in parallel with that, we see a need for continued acceptance of the deployment of transmission and distribution systems and the requisite permitting structure to ensure that that can be done quickly enough to support the drive and meet the need for lower carbon electrons. And then lastly, an increasing digitization of the sector at the systems level, at the asset level, and to ensure optimization of use of electricity, and to do that all securely. I mean, we obviously have lived through a very interesting last couple of days on the cyber front, and so the need to bake in end-to-end security and the utilization of software in the electricity sector. There are challenges that are going to, I think, inhibit the speed and the scale at which this transaction is taking place. Several references to policy. We've seen in the United States how policy can be an exceptional driver to the deployment of systems through policy instruments such as the infrastructure bill and clean energy tax incentives, R&D incentives. All of that, as Secretary Granholm emphasized, is having a real impact. Financing remains a challenge. There are others that are more capable than me on this panel to talk about that, but I would just say the need for flexibility in financing, the need for partnerships in financing to ensure there's a proper allocation of risk between the public and private sectors, that's really an important point. And lastly, the continued need for incentives to drive innovations in technology. These can be very expensive to develop and deploy eventually at scale. And obviously there needs to be a partnership between the public and private sectors to ensure that those innovations can continue. So lots to talk about, Landon, but that's a start.
George, you covered a lot of ground there, and the diversity of projects, I think, is really impressionable. I'm guilty of sometimes talking about energy transition as a monolithic process, and it really is diverse, and I think even in this region alone, the resource allocation, the opportunities aren't all homogenous. And so, Victoria, I think EBRD has a different mandate maybe than some of the other financial institutions here. When we're thinking about prioritizing building of energy infrastructure in the region, how do you balance that energy transition needs with the conventional energy resources that maybe are sustaining access to reliable power right now?
EBRD is a well-known green finance institution. We have, alongside EIB, have made a decision to make sure that our projects are all Paris-aligned. And as of last year, for example, out of 13 billion invested across all of our countries, 6.5 billion was green financing provided to various sectors. Speaking about the energy sector, and I would probably zoom into Romania, our host country for today's event. In Romania, energy sector definitely is a key priority for EBRD's operations. And then speaking about more traditional versus, say, renewable energy, which is really the area of EBRD's focus here, I must admit that given EBRD's energy strategy that was adopted last year, we are going to focus going forward on the renewable energy, clean energy, versus more traditional energy sources, as you have put it in your question. We are here in Romania definitely living through the change in the history, something that I really liked at the opening remarks. Just from the beginning of 2024, EBRD has financed 6 projects that are in total going to provide for 1 gigawatt of total renewable energy capacity in Romania. This is massive, and if we think about the projects that we are financing, EBRD has put around 200 million euros of financing and has managed to attract 1 billion euros of private and public sector financing. So this is really history in the making. This is how we do it. We are financing the projects, we are supporting the project structure. At the same time, we are not doing it alone. We are very convinced that without private sector, this green energy transition is not going to happen. At the same time, public sector also needs to be brought into the table. And in this context, we're working with the Ministry of Energy in Romania for the last 3 years, and we are very impatiently waiting for the CFD scheme that should be launched in the next few months to really be transformational for the energy sector here in Romania, as much more renewable energy projects are expected to come into operation. And then saying whether financing is a challenge or not, I will be provocative here to say that financing is available. EBRD is very interested in providing financing for the projects that indeed will meet our green financing mandate, and I would encourage everyone who is looking to get a reliable financier to come and talk to us.
Minister Parlikov, thank you for your patience with me. I wanted the other speakers to go first because I really thought it was great to give you an opportunity to reflect on what they're saying and how they're looking at financing the transition, because ultimately you have responsibility in Moldova for thinking through in response to Russian aggression in Ukraine, in response to the hardships of the energy security vulnerabilities that we've seen over the last several years, how Moldova responds to this, and how Moldova's energy sector has been impacted by this crisis. What steps has your government taken to enable this energy transition, to enable the conversation of energy security in the context of that is applicable to the context of the PTEC ministerial that we're in the next couple of days?
Well, first of all, thank you very much, and it was indeed very useful to hear from the inputs from my colleagues from the panel. In many respects, indeed, and I'm actually glad to be speaking from a ministerial position in a business part of the forum, and because this gives me an opportunity to underline how important the private sector and the functional markets were in order to address the challenges that we faced in terms of security. And I think not many people, a lot of people take for granted and take for as a given the way the energy sector works, the energy markets work, and the adaptability and the private sector gives us, including on the security side. In many respects, my country, Moldova, is kind of an example, is an emblematic example of the perfect storm that dawned on us actually even before the full-scale aggression into Ukraine. It started for us in October 2021 when suddenly the contract with Gazprom, which at that time was the only supplier of gas we had relations with, refused to be prolonged. And basically they started to impose different conditions, limit the volumes of gas supplied, etc., etc. Now that was the costs of not having options. In many respects, and I will first start with a more regional perspective and then go back to Moldova as an example, in many respects, the way in which EU managed to adapt to a shock that came, particularly on the gas side, but not only, on the electricity as well, coming from this geo-energetic change in terms of availability of resource, in terms of reliability of one of the key suppliers. It was the private sector adaptability and the functional markets that allowed Europe to adjust that fast. Yes, it was very painful. Yes, it was through incredible spike of prices. Yes, that was through a huge pain incurred both on the economies, on the business, on the industry particularly, and on consumers. Yes, the governments have intervened and had the freedom to intervene in many ways in a non-market, with non-market instruments, such as, for instance, in Romania, the caps on the prices. But that was part of a bigger functional markets that allowed quick adaptation, both of the consumers and of the private sector, to compensate for this huge deficit. In 2022, I believe, it was, or was it? No, it was in 2021. In autumn 2021, in Chisinau, I participated in one of the in a conference, and I was not a minister at that time; I was a think tanker. And actually, at that time, I forecasted. I said that the winter of 2021-22 will become a winter of sobriety for Europe. That EU will learn that there is life after Russian gas. Well, ultimately, the EU found this in the next winter, 22-23. But 2021-22 was the first time when the functional markets and flexibility that it gives, the flexibility of the private sector, demonstrated how resilient we can be in the face of dramatic drop of or shocks of supply. Now, another thing that I wanted to mention is the investments, the private sector, and how policies affect the allocation of these investments. Definitely, everybody understands, and it's like in medicine. If you see a patient and he needs a surgery, but he's also bleeding because he has a wound, you don't start with the surgery. You first, stop the bleeding. You stop, close the wound, and then think about the bigger thing. Now, it's like a little bit the same with the security of energy and the green transition. We cannot ignore the fact that at this point in time, and for some time in future, for medium term at least, we will need transition fuel. We will need, and gas is the natural transition fuel in the meantime. Now, we can, in theory, completely, make a decision that we, renounce to it. But the costs of this decision will be huge and will not be, let's say, it's not wise to do it. Now, the investment mechanisms or the financing mechanisms that exist in the European Union at this point, in fact, limit the ability of the European Union to invest into gas infrastructure unless it demonstrates a case for the green component, for instance, hydrogen. And it is extremely difficult today, for instance, in the region to demonstrate a case for a business case, feasible business case for green hydrogen. Therefore, some of the investments which are desperately required on the infrastructure, on the gas infrastructure, are being delayed. Some of the investment decisions are being delayed. And primarily I'm talking about the vertical corridor. One of the answers that EU had and we as a region had to the gas supply shocks was a dramatic change of the routes through which gas comes into Europe and is distributed in Europe. Balkans have become one of the biggest entry point for gas. Previously it was one of the big consumption points, but never a big entry point. Now with LNG terminals in Greece, with Turkey having a huge transit role, with new LNG terminals in Croatia, the region becomes abundant in entry of the gas sources. And now it is a matter of infrastructure, of how do we make sure that this gas actually is distributed from the region, is off-taken to other places. And how, and whether we can use this abundance of gas that can come to this region to basically substitute the model which was previously only available for Gazprom around the gas storage facilities in Western Ukraine. Because I want to remind everyone that one of the reasons why Gazprom was an extremely appreciated supplier on the European market was because they had this model where they filled in the summer the gas storage facilities in Europe, but in Western Ukraine as well, because it was the Western Ukrainian, or the gas storage facilities in Western Ukraine are approximately 30% of the total gas storage facilities of the EU. So it's huge. They filled them in the summer, and they were the only supplier who could quickly disperse large volumes of gas when needed in the EU. Now, from the infrastructural point of view, this model is or can be made available to any trader by simply increasing the capacities or with relatively minor investments on the gas infrastructure, on the Trans-Balkans pipeline, on the regional piping, including on the northern side from Croatia more into Hungary and Austria. But this can be done. Now, these investment decisions are being delayed largely because the financing is limited to making cases around hydrogen. Now a little bit, and I see you want to stop me.
Well, no, I want to ask a follow-on question, but keep going, please.
So I will just a little bit showcase of how all this regional picture, how do we fall in all this regional picture as a country, and why Moldova is kind of a good showcase of what happens. First of all, if I were to mention one thing that actually changed the shape of energy in Moldova in the last years, and it was a direct outcome, a direct result of the invasion in Ukraine, it would be the synchronization of the grids. It would be the synchronization of Ukrainian and Moldovan electricity grids with ENTSO-E. That is what kept the lights on in Moldova. That is what keeps the lights on in Ukraine right now. That is what keeps us functioning, even if the large portions of critical infrastructure in Ukraine are destroyed, are completely destroyed now. Moreover, this enabled us in many respects, including in terms of diversification of our gas supplies. I won't go into much details, but there was a big infrastructural dependence on the critical energy infrastructure in a region that we don't control of our country, in the Transnistrian region, which is controlled, like decision of the European Court of Human Rights, by the Russians. And this dependence on the critical infrastructure in the Transnistrian region was preventing us from making more bold steps in terms of diversification our electricity and gas supply sources. It is only after this synchronization, after we have become part of the larger continental European grid, that we could do it. And investments in renewables and investments in diversification of gas supplies and investment in new interconnections with Romania. These are all part of the same pattern to try to build both the resilience and the security and also create the infrastructure needed for further deployment of renewables and greening of the energy.
Agnes, I want to bring you back in the conversation here. I'm paraphrasing something that the minister just said, but basically there's a need through this crisis to triage the energy system. And triage is a word that reflects risk, frankly, that, that these investments do have risk. And I want to just focus for a moment on that topic, on how we mitigate the risk that might be associated with clean energy projects. The expense and the perspective that the minister acknowledged that gas is needed for the energy transition because the alternatives can be perceived as expensive. How do we accelerate a clean energy transition amongst this very volatile geopolitical landscape?
So I think actually drawing on what the minister was just saying, the first and the best way to really mitigate risks is to make sure we have choices. So really making sure that the clean energy economy is really dependent on very diverse supply chains, not only for fuel, but also for equipment. So for example, last year we invested over $1 billion in India into PV manufacturing. And we're actually looking at potential manufacturing opportunities around clean energy in Europe as well. This is really important because obviously what we don't want to go from is dependence on one actor on fuel to dependence on equipment. For example, battery storage from just one country. I think this is really important to also think about the fact that that has an implication for how we establish diverse supply chains of critical minerals. So it's not just the actual equipment, it's also where are the minerals that are critical for clean energy transition, where are they coming from, who has control over those. So I think the first best way to mitigate risk is to make sure that we're investing in diverse supply chains that then feed into the clean energy transition. I think the second way to mitigate is really to make sure that the government policies are very much aligned. So the way that we were able to really invest in India, and the reason it was such a large investment is because the government of India put in lots of incentives to attract PV manufacturing to their country. So the governments need to be aligned on what their strategy is, because the private sector, we invest in with private sector all the time. They're never concerned about the regulations. They're concerned about the unpredictability of regulations. So once there is a playing field that is leveled, the private sector understands, once they understand what the incentives are, they really can move forward very quickly and deliver the right kind of capital to make those government plans happen. So the second way is really to make sure that there is visibility, transparency, and consistency in local regulation. And the third, of course, is to work with organizations such as ourselves, EIB, EBRD. We work together quite a bit. We feel that the private sector, not only capital providers, but also operating companies, really take some comfort when they co-invest alongside with development finance institutions, simply because they then know that we are bringing in really a transparent, standardized approach to, for example, environmental and social risks, which are risks that are often overlooked. But we help address those through our technical assistance, through our advisory services. This is really a key component of investing in this region. And for example, we offer political risk insurance, which really covers private investors from things like risk of expropriation or currency and convertibility. Those kinds of tools that DFIs offer, I feel, are a very strong and effective way of managing risk when investing in energy.
Well, let's keep this trend of thinking about these diversification of tools and resources that can be tapped to help propel the energy transition. Marius and Victoria, this is a question for both of you. Maybe we can start with Marius. I'm thinking about EIB's pioneering role in creating green bonds. And obviously these were financial tools when I started my career in energy foreign policy that were really nascent 15 years ago, and now have matured quite extensively. Thinking about the new resources that are being pioneered today, are there tools that you really want to highlight that you think we can capture as we look at the PTEC for the next 5 years? What should we be talking about that can enable the transition, that can enable energy security, just in terms of the actual financial resources?
Maybe I can start. So the EIB has issued its first green bond, the first green bond in the world, actually 17 years ago, and it was a 600 million euro transaction. Since then, we've issued 79 billion more. But the market we helped to create is nowadays bigger than $1 trillion. And the way this instrument works is simple. It's a promise. We promised our bond investors that we will only invest the proceeds from their bonds into renewable energy and energy efficiency. And with this, we created the interest. We raised the awareness. Actually, our instrument is called Climate Awareness Bond. And we have created a robust instrument based on robust reporting and not only in terms of allocations, but also in terms of impact, which help the institutional investors channel their funds into where their constituencies, their members, mandate them to do so. And actually, this is an instrument that answers your questions, because we may invest in higher risk countries, or we may invest in risky technologies, but what the investors buy from us is a AAA bond. Yeah? So de facto we de-risk for them. This we put an interface between the country risk or project risk and their investment guidelines. So if I'm going back to what I said earlier, that we can see that there is relatively high liquidity in the financial markets. One way to attract this liquidity is to help other investors co-invest with us in projects by ensuring proper due diligence and a good appraisal. And another way, of course, is to attract the liquidity from the market through instruments such as this, which are also policy implementation instruments, yeah, because we direct the money into fulfilling the EU policy objectives. And if we started in 2007 with allocations only to renewable energy and energy efficiency, we have expanded gradually these sectors since 2020 into, for example, research and development of new low carbon technologies, clean transportation, and so on. So to me, this is a very good example whereby you put to work money from institutional investors who may not have the capacity to invest directly into project finance, and you, in this way, you help channel the funds in what is a multi-trillion need market.
Victoria, I want to give you an opportunity to expand on this idea of investment instruments that can maybe be overlooked or often overlooked that could be resources for the P-Tech community?
In terms of financing structures, at this point in time, I really truly believe that the energy sector per se, whether we speak about public sector, whether we speak about private sector, has the right toolkit of the financing tools. And of course, green bonds, sustainability-linked bonds, these are very useful tools for the investors who would like to really maximize the outreach to their investor community, whether these are development banks, whether these are investors who are looking for green assets in their portfolios. And when we speak about energy sector per se in Central Europe, Southeastern Europe, what I have seen so far, and before coming to Romania, I was based in Croatia and covering several other Central European countries, I have not seen really that many green bonds issued by the companies that were investing in the renewable energy projects, because they could get usually bilateral loans, syndicated loans, and at this point in time, I cannot really see quite a large surge in the interest in the capital markets instruments here in the region where we are with you right now. Having said it, definitely going forward, these instruments should be used more widely. But maybe a small deviation from the question that you have asked, and to follow on what the Minister has said. I think we have a lot of know-how, we have a lot of instruments, there is a lot of funding that is there. What we are running out of is time. I think this is something that we probably don't pay attention to, because indeed we speak about green energy transition, we speak about electrification, we speak about the storage, but at the same time, we kind of, I think, still are not paying enough attention to who is doing what, when, and how. And this is really where I think probably the future events could focus on, because from my perspective, all of us, jointly and individually, can definitely make things happen, can accelerate this green energy transition, but at this point in time, we probably can accelerate this work while working together and looking for the solutions that will indeed come to their result, whereby whether this is Moldova, whether this is other countries in the neighborhood who are definitely experience problems with their energy supply. And when you speak about energy shortage at the times when the temperature soaring to 40 degrees, or when you speak about energy shortage when the temperature goes down to -20, then we're really speaking about the real challenges that need to be addressed. And they need to be addressed not in 10 years from now, but they need to be addressed sooner rather than later.
I think the sense of urgency is a great issue that we should seize upon, Victoria. I would say in the world of time, one thing that can buy us more time and an outcome of COP28 is a very strong focus on abating methane emissions. And I want to bring this conversation to George because of this. There's a lot of efforts to create new financial tools to help deploy methane abatement technology, to help build broader infrastructure while we engage in that effort. What strategies are you seeing deployed for scaling the decarb side of the equation?
Yeah, thank you for the question, Landon. Obviously, there's clear consensus in the energy transition about the role that renewables will play, that zero carbon options will play. Where we lack consensus is around what do we do with natural gas. Most of the stakeholders whom we speak with, be they grid operators, system planners, ministries, et cetera, they all know that there is a need to keep large rotating equipment on the grid that's going to complement battery storage where that can be deployed, but ultimately is required for a grid that's reliable and secure. So in the meantime, what do you do about that? It's not a technology problem to deploy hydrogen in a gas turbine or to utilize carbon capture and storage on a gas-fired power plant. The technology exists today to do that. We've got over 8 million hours of operating experience for our gas turbines on hydrogen blends, in some cases up to 100%. Our entire fleet will be hydrogen capable by 2030. Similarly, we're working with customers and other stakeholders in markets like the United States, Canada, elsewhere, to deploy CCUS systems on natural gas plants. So this challenge is not really a technology problem, but really an infrastructure problem. How do you deploy those systems at scale and at a reasonable level of cost? And in my view, that challenge it's not going to be an event that happens overnight. It's a process that's going to take years to unfold. And in the meantime, does that mean that you choose not to deploy a gas-fired system in the interim, even when that system, if it's replacing coal, could reduce carbon emissions by up to 60%, or at the same time produce a far more efficient combined heat and power project than currently exists? When I talked about the need for flexibility earlier, this is exactly what I'm talking about. Understanding, Landon, to borrow your term, that this energy transition isn't a monolith. There's an urgent need for carbon reductions in the very near term. There are ways to achieve that without losing sight of how you decarbonize some of these systems you'll be deploying now and in the future. And of course, we didn't even touch upon this, but there is technology that can be deployed upstream and midstream to mitigate fugitive methane emissions that obviously needs to be deployed more forcefully, more fully, and more widely.
Thank you all. Minister Parlikov, I want to conclude this conversation with you. And I don't want to trivialize the immediate needs and the urgency to address with the crisis, but I do want to turn our attention to the future. We've been under, much of the PTEC conversation has been colored by Russian aggression in Ukraine. One day, I think we believe in this community, that is going to come to an end. And we need to be ready for that day and reconstruction and opportunities that are good for Ukraine, good for Europe, good for Moldova. What should we be thinking about in that context for the future?
Well, I think a largely discussed topic is the topic of energy efficiency of the buildings and energy efficiency of the district heating systems. Everybody's talking about electricity, everybody's talking about green transition in terms of electricity. But in that part of the world, with Ukraine, with Moldova, and the wave of refugees that we're going to witness in the upcoming winter is not going to be because of the deficit of electricity, is going to be more because people will not be able to maintain heat in their homes. And it's freezing cold in Ukraine in winters. So I think one thing that we need to bring in the picture is the discussion about energy performance of the buildings. Not only new buildings, but there's a huge stock of former Soviet buildings that can be, and it's wise to be, at least a big portion of it, to be brought to current, to modern energy performance standards. That would save lots of money, that would save lots of energy, lots of emissions. Other than that, of course, all the interconnections that we're doing would probably make Moldova as the biggest natural bridge between the energy system of the EU and the Ukraine. Probably is no single direct connection between Ukraine and the EU directly that is going to be, able to upkeep such huge flows of electricity. On the energy side, I think this would be the two bigger things: integrating the infrastructure in order to better integrate renewables and energy efficiency of the buildings and district heating systems.
Mr. Minister, distinguished panelists, thank you for joining us for the first conversation and panel discussion of the 5th PTEC Business Forum. It's been a great discussion, and we look forward to many more to come. Audience, please join me in thanking our panelists for kicking off this great conversation today.